Hey everybody, if you found this video useful or interesting in any way, please give me a like and subscribe. That would help out a lot for the growth of this channel, and it'll let me know that I'm doing something that you enjoy. All right? See ya. Injuries in training, specifically training. The context has to be important because if we're going to talk about training, there's always a chance that you're going to have an injury happen. And at the same time, the likelihood of being injured when you're actually involved in your sport is going to be much higher, more likely than when you're training. So, what are some of the factors related to training injuries and how can you do your best to avoid them? So, the first part is if we are going to be training really hard for a long enough period of time, we want to be progressive with our training. We can't just make these large leaps and bounds in training. Let's say you're used to squatting 150 kilos and that's where you've been at for a number of weeks and it's been challenging. You don't want to just jump to 180 kilos the very next week. Making smaller progressive adjustments is what's going to help you a lot of the time with mitigating some of that injury risk. So that might be one major factor that you can consider. Another factor to consider is going to be your overall training volume. So again, when you're looking at changing that intensity from, let's say, that 150 to 180, you also don't want to pile on a bunch of volume in a sudden time period. You want it to be much more progressive and kind of ramp that up. And neither of those things should be done continuously. You can't continuously increase weight. You can't continuously increase volume. You absolutely should be training hard, but you don't want to be training to max every single time you're training. And that's one thing I see with a lot of newer individuals getting involved in any sort of training is they always want a red line, and eventually that catches up to you. Okay, so another major consideration within training is technique. And my opinion, and what's supported by a lot of research, is technique is highly variable. Different people are going to have different solutions to movements. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't generally replicate a movement pattern, but you can't shoot for a perfect pattern. It just doesn't happen. And for those individuals that are able to be more perfect, congratulations. There are great factors. Does that mean that you won't ever get hurt being in perfect technique? No, you absolutely can still get hurt. So the goal is more to shoot for getting as close to perfect as you can, but realizing that you may have some differences in how you move based on a number of different factors that can limit you from your ability to be in that perfect training technique. Okay, so that's going to be another one that a lot of people kind of overblow. And in my opinion, training technique takes the cake with most influencers who don't really know what they're talking about. And yeah, people are going to be upset to hear about that, but oh well, that's the truth. Okay, stress. So we talked about volume and intensity as a means of rapidly jumping things up for your risk of injury. And life stress can also impact that. So, stress being a physical factor, it can impact you mentally, it can impact you physically, whether that's training or if it's something going on in your life. Absolutely, those things can have an influence in your training and your susceptibility to injury. So, those are some things that you need to be able to consider and understand, and you have to have a training program that can adjust to some of those variables so that you can remain at a high enough training intensity to where you aren't constantly redlining, you aren't in a phase of just pushing through, even though life is crumbling around you, even though sometimes you can do that and you can get away with that. But there are plenty of other times where if life isn't right, it's going to be really tough for you to get good quality training in, and you might actually be at a higher risk of injuring yourself. So you need to have that consideration in mind. And then finally, rest and recovery. So if you are not giving yourself enough rest and recovery, so this is both intraset, So while you're actually working out, I'm sorry, intra-session. So when you're doing your training, whether that's squat, bench, jumping, sprinting, whatever it is, you want to have a good amount of rest to not be so fatigued that you're actually putting yourself at risk to have more technical breakdowns, more mental breakdowns that can affect your technique. And you want to have higher quality repetitions. And on top of that, from session to session, you want to make sure that you're getting enough time to recover, uh, make sure that you're getting enough nutrition in to actually replace some of those metabolites that you're going to be losing, some different factors that are going to be occurring from one training session to the next. Generally speaking, the thought process is 24 to 48 hours for a recovery period, and that's going to be kind of a good spot to really be paying attention to. But it also depends on your training age, your level of training, your background with training, and own individual differences. Some people tolerate training at higher frequency than others. I certainly do not. When I have 4 or 5 training sessions a week, I know that I'm going to be putting myself at a higher risk. Sometimes it's more beneficial to be at that stage, sometimes it's not. So it really depends on a lot of different factors. I know there's a lot of it depends kind of answers, but the reality is that is how training is. That's how quality training is. There are many different things. It's a constantly adjusting thing, and you have to have that kind of rationale when you're going into high quality training.